Hi, I'm Rowena. I brought homemade soup and groceries to my parents' house, just trying to be kind. I wasn't expecting applause, but I also wasn't expecting that. Because when I turned the corner, I saw my sister kissing my husband on their porch. And my parents? They looked right at me and said, "Don't make a scene. She's family too." I stood there holding shattered glass, and I realized maybe I was never part of this family to begin with. But what they didn't know is how much I remembered and what I was about to do next. Before we dive in, tell me, where are you watching from? And what time is it? I read every comment. I hadn't planned on going. That morning, I was still in my pajamas, sipping lukewarm coffee in our quiet kitchen while the leaves outside drifted down in slow spirals, painting the backyard in gold and rust. Then I saw the leftover sourdough starter in the fridge and thought, Mom always loved fresh bread on Sundays. That was enough to get me moving. By late morning, a warm loaf sat cooling on a rack, steam still rising from the crust. I gathered a few things from the pantry, my homemade chicken soup in a mason jar, fresh apples, their favorite Vermont cheddar, and a jar of fig jam. Not fancy, just thoughtful. Something from me, the wayward daughter who always tried to show up in quiet ways. I didn't call ahead, didn't text. I figured maybe a small surprise would feel more genuine, maybe it would soften something between us. Lately, I'd felt it. The widening space, not just physical, but that heavy emotional distance that you can't bridge with a smile or a phone call. So, I went. The drive from our house near Nederland to my parents' place outside Boulder was familiar, winding past pine trees and old barns. Levi was working a job site that day, and I hadn't mentioned my visit. I liked the idea of doing this on my own. No warning, no staging, no ceremony. I glanced at the passenger seat. The bread was wrapped in a linen towel, still warm. I smiled to myself, thinking this is what good daughters do. Bring food, help out, be present. I'd been the helper my whole life, the youngest, the one who didn't push back, who said yes, even when it stung. Callista was the golden one, beautiful, magnetic, always knew how to say the right thing in front of the right people. I was dependable, the girl who cleaned up after the party. As I pulled into the gravel driveway, the familiar crunch under my tires stirred something oddly tender. This was the house I grew up in. The smell of firewood floated on the breeze. Autumn in Colorado always felt like a postcard. No one saw me arrive. I parked beside Dad's truck, grabbed the basket, and made my way toward the porch. It was quiet. No barking dog, no greeting. Just the rustle of wind and voices carrying from the side yard. I followed the sound. My steps slowed when I heard Callista laugh. That laugh, sweet and light, the kind people lean into. Then a second voice joined. Low, familiar. Levi. I rounded the corner and time fractured. There they were, Callista and Levi, standing too close on the back porch, backs to me. She touched his arm. He didn't move. She leaned in and kissed him. Not a peck, not familial. Her lips lingered. His hand settled at her waist before he pulled away slightly. I saw the flicker in his eyes, hesitation, maybe guilt. But it came too late. The grocery basket slipped from my hands. The soup jar hit the stone step and exploded, shards and golden broth splashing across Callista's suede boots. They turned, eyes wide, and just behind them, on the porch, stood my parents. They weren't shocked. They weren't moving. They weren't even pretending to be ashamed. My father looked me straight in the eye and said, "Don't make a scene. She's family too." Something inside me cracked, not from the kiss, but from that sentence. She's family too. As if that made it okay. As if that erased the heat rising in my chest, the sting behind my eyes, the weight of being treated like furniture. There, but never really seen. I looked at my mother. Her arms were folded, her jaw tight. She didn't speak. Levi stepped toward me. I raised a hand, not to hit, just to stop. No one moved. I bent down, picked up a jagged piece of glass with trembling fingers, then let it fall back into the mess. Then I turned and walked back to my car. No one followed. No one called after me. The door creaked shut behind me like punctuation. Inside the car, I sat in silence, the basket's handle still imprinting a red line across my palm. My hands shook. My mouth was dry. I gripped the steering wheel. "She's family too," I whispered, and then again. "She's family too." My throat tightened, my voice dropped to barely a breath. And what am I? I didn't even remember turning the key in the ignition. The car just moved, like my body had decided for me. As I drove back toward Lafayette, the sun dropped low over the hills. The road blurred at the edges. I kept blinking to stay focused, my fingers locked around the steering wheel so tightly it ached. The same question ran circles in my mind. What am I? A placeholder? A prop in someone else's love story? By the time I pulled into our driveway, the sky had turned lavender. The house sat quiet, blinds drawn. I turned off the engine and just sat. For a long time. The basket from earlier still sat in the passenger seat, its contents ruined. I left it there. Inside, I dropped my keys on the counter. The silence was different now. It wasn't peaceful. It pressed in on me, heavy and sharp. I walked past the dining table, past the framed photo from our 5th anniversary trip to Glacier. I couldn't look at it. That's when I saw it. My scarf. It hung by the back door, like it had always lived there. Soft gray wool with hand-stitched edges, the one I'd searched for a dozen times last winter and eventually gave up on. A chill passed through me like the fabric remembered more than I did. I reached out, fingers brushing it, and suddenly I was back at that Christmas brunch 2 years ago. Callista had worn it. I remember the way it clung to her neck, too familiar. She had laughed when I pointed it out, said, "Oh, Levi gave it to me. I'm always cold, and he said this one looked cozy." She tossed it off like it was nothing. I had let it go. Of course I had. I always did. Back then it felt like a stretch to assume anything more. Just my sister being her usual charismatic self. Just Levi being helpful. Now? It wasn't just a scarf. I sank into the kitchen chair, still holding the wool in my lap. My thoughts unraveled faster than I could catch them. The drives Levi insisted on making. "I'll drop her off, it's no big deal." How she'd giggle and call him her backup husband at family dinners. The day our mom accidentally said, "I'm just glad Levi is such a stable part of Callista's life." And I'd smiled. God help me. I had smiled. I told myself they were just close, that I was lucky to have a husband who cared about family. No, I was lying to myself because the alternative was too ugly. I got up and walked slowly to the bedroom, pulled open the bottom drawer of my nightstand. My old iPhone sat there, cracked screen still able to power on. I hadn't touched it in over a year. I plugged it in, waited for the battery icon to blink. The light from the lamp spilled across the bedspread as I waited. My chest tightened, like I already knew what I would find. Once it powered on, I opened the Messages app. iCloud Sync. I didn't expect anything too damning. Levi wasn't careless, but something told me Callista was. I searched her name. Most messages were wiped clean, except for 3 fragments in the archived threads. They hadn't synced properly, but they were enough. "Can't wait to see you again. You make me forget everything. Don't worry. She doesn't suspect a thing." My jaw clenched so tightly I could feel the pressure in my temples. I didn't cry. I took screenshots. I forwarded them to my new phone. Then I set the old phone down and stared at it for a long time. They didn't just steal my husband. They rewrote my story. They had been writing it for years, behind my back, over my silence, while I ran errands, while I stayed late to grade essays, while I showed up to every family event and handed out the mashed potatoes with a smile. I had bent myself into every shape they needed: daughter, wife, helper. I had erased my own anger, my own suspicions to keep things peaceful. But the scarf was never just a scarf. The messages weren't accidents, and I was done pretending. I sat in the dark, my hands wrapped around that scarf like it might answer me. My voice didn't even sound like mine when I finally whispered aloud, "I've been erasing myself to protect them, but what if I stop?" The next morning, I woke with a dull ache behind my eyes and the heavy feeling of dreams I couldn't remember. The bedroom was quiet. Levi had left early for a job site, or so he said. I didn't ask. I didn't want to hear his voice. Not yet. I moved through the house like a ghost. Coffee. Clothes. Keys. I barely noticed the drive to campus. Trees along Baseline Road were shedding their autumn leaves in brittle clumps, the wind brushing them across the pavement like whispers I didn't want to hear. I parked in the staff lot and walked toward my building, clutching my bag like a shield. By 8:30, I was sitting behind my desk at Boulder Community College, trying to grade midterm essays. My fingers moved, but my mind drifted. Every word on the page blurred into the next, until one essay, half crumpled and smudged at the edges, caught my eye. It belonged to Mia, a quiet student who often sat near the back. Her topic, family loyalty versus personal truth. I started reading, expecting vague statements about honesty and obligation, but a few paragraphs in, I stopped cold. She was the one who kept the peace, who stayed quiet, who brought the birthday gifts and made the casseroles, but one day her niece saw it, her mother laughing in the arms of a man who wasn't hers. When she told her aunt, they all said the same thing. Don't make a scene. Blood means silence. I read that sentence 3 times. Blood means silence. It echoed exactly what my parents had told me on the porch. Different words, same message. Don't disrupt the illusion. Be the quiet one. Again. I underlined it slowly, letting the pen drag across the page. The truth in that sentence didn't just sting, it shook something loose. I glanced at the classroom clock. It was 10:43, still an hour until my next lecture. As I was gathering up the essays, Jean from the communications department passed by my office door. She paused, backtracking slightly. "Hey, Rowena," she said, smiling. "Quick question. Was Levi in town a few weeks ago? I thought he told you he had a job in Pueblo." I looked up, startled. "Yeah, that's what he said." Jean tilted her head. "Weird. I swear I saw him and your sister at Garden and Grain. Remember that wine bar next to the co-op? They looked like they were on a little date. I almost came over to say hi but figured you were having some kind of family catch-up." My heart didn't race. It sank, deep and heavy, like a stone dropped in still water. I forced a smile. "Maybe I was just busy that day." She nodded and waved goodbye. I waited until she turned the corner before exhaling. That same weekend, Levi had told me he'd be gone overnight, out of cell service. "Long concrete pour," he'd said. I remember cooking alone that evening, watching a documentary about famous hoaxes. When my shift ended, I didn't go straight home. I stopped at the cafe on the edge of Pearl Street, sat in the corner booth, and stirred a cup of mint tea until it went cold. I didn't check my phone. I didn't write anything in my planner. I just thought. Something was shifting inside me. Not rage, not heartbreak. Focus. By the time I got home, the house was still. Levi's truck was parked outside. He must have gone to bed early. I slipped through the door quietly, took off my shoes, and stood in the dark kitchen. I moved straight to his home office. The drawer was locked. Bottom right, the one he always said jammed. I pulled the little tin from the closet shelf, the one labeled USBs and old chargers. Inside, as I remembered, was the tiny silver key taped to the bottom. I slid it into the lock. Click. Inside were manila folders, half stuffed with receipts, statements, and a few wrinkled envelopes. I took them to the table and began sorting. Most of it was typical contractor paperwork, invoices, building supply orders, a few permit forms. But then I saw it. Silver Thistle Holdings, LLC. I didn't recognize the name, but the address listed on a rental agreement jolted me. It was in Lafayette, 1 block over from Callista's apartment. I kept reading. A bank statement showed recurring rent payments to that address, under the business name. Transfers from our joint account to a separate business checking I had no idea existed. The payments went back nearly a year. Every page felt like another needle threaded into my skin, not dramatic, not loud, just deep enough to bleed. I gathered the papers into a neat pile, took photos with my phone, then tucked them back exactly as I'd found them. No confrontation. Not yet. I didn't want them to know I knew, not until I decided what came next. Standing there in the hallway, folder under my arm, I felt something click into place. Not brokenness, not panic. Just the quiet realization that I hadn't been the last to know. I'd been the only one not lying, the whole family. Levi, Callista, even my parents. They'd been building a version of life that had no place for me. I wasn't just removed from the story, I'd been cut out of the frame altogether. But no more. I took the scarf from the coat rack, the one he'd given her, and wrapped it around my neck. Not because it was cold, because I was claiming it back. I looked at myself in the hallway mirror, tired, clear-eyed, and whispered to my reflection, "No more disappearing. No more disappearing." That sentence stayed with me like a stone pressed under my tongue as I stood in the grocery aisle, staring at rows of boxed pies, pumpkin, cherry, apple. I didn't care. I grabbed the least dented one and dropped it in my basket without looking twice. I wasn't baking today. No fresh sourdough, no folded linen, no handwritten card. They didn't deserve warmth anymore. What I brought now was silence and eyes wide open. The anniversary gathering started at 4. I timed my arrival precisely 15 minutes late, just long enough to make it clear I wasn't trying to please anyone anymore. The driveway was full. Uncle Mason's truck, my cousin Darcy's minivan, the usual suspects. I parked 2 doors down and walked the rest of the way with the boxed pie in one hand and nothing in the other. No smile, no peace offering. From the moment I stepped onto the lawn, I could feel it. That invisible shift in temperature when you walk into a room and realize your name has already been spoken. Twice? Maybe more. Callista stood on the back deck holding a glass of wine like it was an award. Her laugh floated across the yard, crisp, rehearsed. She was in white again, a tight satin dress that gleamed in the late sun. She always wore white to our parents' events, claimed it brought them joy. I was in slate gray. My mother hovered beside her, adjusting the table runner, while Dad chuckled with someone I didn't recognize from across the porch. Levi, of course, was by the grill, tong in hand like a stage prop. He wore that same flannel I bought him last Christmas, sleeves rolled up, posture relaxed. They all looked like a postcard I wasn't mailed. Levi was the first to notice me. He walked over, hands out like nothing had happened. "There's my girl," he said, pulling me into a hug I didn't return. He kissed my cheek, public display, cold lips, and then leaned in just slightly. "Glad you came, babe. You're gonna make today special." I didn't blink. "Didn't come for you." He gave a short laugh, like I'd told a clever joke. "Classic you," he muttered, and patted my back twice before stepping away. I set the pie down on the corner table, next to one of Callista's floral arrangements. She'd placed tiny name cards around the table settings, printed in gold script. Of course she had. I scanned the table. No name for me? Before I could move, Callista appeared beside me. "Hey sis," she said too brightly. Then, in a move I didn't see coming, she pulled me into a long, overly tight hug. Her voice dropped against my ear. "Don't ruin it for them. They're old. Just let them be happy." I pulled back slowly, holding her gaze. Her smile stayed fixed, but her eyes flickered. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. I walked past her, through the patio door, into the kitchen to grab water. The sink was full of half-washed pans and salad tongs. I stood there, facing the window, until the screen door creaked open again, and voices drifted inside. Someone laughed about Levi, finally getting the grill right. Another voice toasted to family that sticks together. My grip tightened around the glass. No one came to greet me. No one asked how I was doing. At 5:30 the toasts began. My father stood first. 52 years married, he began, and still learning every day. Laughter. Applause. Then Mom stepped up beside him, wine in hand. "We just want to thank everyone," she said, eyes shining, "especially our girls." She turned to Callista. Callie, sweetheart, you've always been the strong one. You stepped up when we needed help. You've been like a second daughter to us all." The silence that followed was deafening. I looked down. My glass was empty. I hadn't been served. Someone across the table, a cousin maybe, snorted into their napkin. A smirk passed from one side of the table to the other. Callista gave a gracious nod. Levi reached for her hand under the table. I stood, slowly, calmly. Straightening my coat, I looked around the table. The sun had dropped low enough that the shadows stretched long over the grass. A breeze rustled the edge of the tablecloth, lifting the corners like a breath before a scream. I kept my voice level. "I won't stay long." All heads turned. "I just wanted to see," I said, "what I'm no longer part of." The room, or porch, or whatever this stage scene was, froze. I turned toward the door without waiting for a response. My heels clicked against the deck boards. Someone whispered my name behind me, but I didn't stop. They had made me silent for years. Now they'd watch me walk away. The ride home was quiet. I didn't play music. I didn't need anything competing with the noise inside my head. My hands were cold on the steering wheel, even though the heater was on. I kept driving past familiar corners, parks I used to take Levi to, a diner where Mom once made me cry in public, and felt like a ghost sliding through a town that used to be mine. When I pulled into the driveway, the porch light was off. I hadn't realized it was already dark. I sat in the car for a long moment, watching the outline of my house through the windshield. It looked unfamiliar in the night, like someone else's place, a house staged for someone else's life. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. No barking dog, no husband greeting me from the couch, just silence and the soft hum of the fridge. Everything was clean. Too clean. That kind of clean that didn't smell like effort or lemon cleaner, just the absence of anyone living. I walked past the coat rack and caught my reflection in the mirror. My hair was still pinned from the gathering. My lipstick had worn off, leaving just the faint outline of a woman who'd tried. Who did I build this life for? I went room to room like I was searching for something, or maybe erasing something. In the hallway, I paused at the wall of family photos. There was one of me and Levi in Breckenridge, another from my graduation with Mom kissing my cheek, and Callista right behind us, always in frame. The frames felt heavier than they used to. One by one, I pulled them down. No ceremony. No hesitation. Just the quiet tap of nails hitting hardwood and the faint squeak of glass against skin. I didn't break them. I just placed them face down on the guest bed and shut the door. Then I sat down on the stairs. Not on a couch, not in a chair, just the middle step where you can see most of the house but none of it feels like yours. That's when my phone buzzed in my coat pocket. A voicemail. I didn't recognize the number at first, but the transcription preview read, "Honey, I'm so sorry." I pressed play. It was Aunt Teresa's voice. My mother's younger sister, the only one who ever sent birthday cards that actually had something handwritten. "Honey, I tried to talk them out of it, but your parents are naming Callista as the sole executor of the estate. It's already filed. She's not just the executor. She's the trustee, too. I thought you knew. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I really thought you knew." The message ended. I didn't cry right away. I just stared at the dark screen, heart pounding like it had somewhere to go. It wasn't just a betrayal, it was a rewrite. I stood up slowly and walked toward Levi's office. There was something he'd mentioned once, months ago, maybe a year. He was proud of it. A hidden drawer he'd built into the underside of his desk for surprise gifts, he said. "You never know when you might want to stash something romantic," he'd winked. That drawer wasn't meant for me. I opened the desk drawers, one by one, until I found the false panel. I slid my fingers underneath the lip and pressed gently. There was a soft click. The drawer popped open an inch. Inside was a small velvet box and a folded piece of notepaper. I opened the box first. A delicate ring, white gold, one small stone, understated. Not at all like the engagement ring Levi had given me, which was larger, antique, something we'd picked together. This one, This felt like a secret. I picked up the note. His handwriting was unmistakable. Slanted, confident. At the top, a date, 6 months before our wedding. It read, "C and I, one day, no more hiding." My knees gave out. I sank to the floor with the box in my hand, the note slipping onto my lap like ash. Every muscle in my chest clenched. They'd been planning this before I even walked down the aisle. I wasn't erased. I was replaced. I sat there in the hallway, the office light flickering behind me, and let the truth settle over me like a second skin. It didn't sting anymore, not the way it did before. A single tear slid down my cheek. I didn't wipe it away. I didn't need to. I picked up the note, folded it neatly, and placed it in my pocket. Then I whispered to the stillness around me, "Then I'll give them something they'll never see coming." I woke up Tuesday morning before the alarm could buzz, staring at the sliver of sunlight cutting through the blinds. My eyes burned, not from sleep, but from the weight that sat behind them all night. I didn't feel broken anymore, just sharpened, like something had cracked and let the clarity in. I texted my department chair at the college that I'd be out sick. I didn't lie. Not really. Just omitted the part where I wasn't physically sick, but soul-worn, betrayed, and finally ready to act. I pulled on a gray turtleneck, loose jeans, and slipped my sunglasses over my still swollen eyes. Then I tucked the ring box, the handwritten note, and the voicemail transcript from Aunt Teresa into a manila envelope. I didn't look at them again. I just slid the envelope into my tote bag, got into my car, and drove north toward Longmont. Daniel Foster had been a friend since undergrad. He now handled estate law and trusts, made a career out of unraveling other people's secrets, all while keeping his own impeccably sealed. When I walked into his office, he stood immediately and stepped around his desk. "Ro," he said quietly, reading my face. "Are you okay?" "No," I answered, sitting down, "but I think you're about to confirm something that'll help me get there." He nodded and didn't waste time with pity. I handed him the envelope and waited as he scanned the contents. He tapped a few keys on his computer, bringing up public records faster than I'd expected. "Let me check the supplemental deed filings," he muttered. Then, after a few seconds, his lips tightened. "Rowena, your name isn't on the secondary deed anymore. It was quietly removed 5 months ago." My stomach dropped. That's our trust. Our house." Daniel turned the monitor so I could see it. Sure enough, there was Levi's signature and a version of mine beneath it, dated last November. I blinked. "I never signed that." He looked at me, hesitant. "He might have repurposed your signature from something else. Was there any paperwork you remember from that time?" And then I remembered. Levi had handed me a stack of documents at dinner one night, 6 pages thick. "Taxes," he'd said, "refinancing, trust updates, boring stuff. Just sign so I can get it filed tomorrow. You trust me, right?" I had smiled, signed, and passed the salad. Daniel was still watching me. That might have been it. I stared at the screen, at my own name fading from legal memory. "He used my love like a signature stamp," I murmured. Daniel didn't respond. What could he say? When I stood to leave, he pressed a hand over mine gently. "Ro, take screenshots of everything, keep records, and don't confront him until you're safe. Financially, legally, emotionally. You hear me?" I nodded. Back in the car, I didn't cry. I drove with the windows cracked and the heater on. My mind was already running ahead of me, making checklists, calculating timelines. If they could make a move in silence, so could I. By the time I reached home, it was early afternoon. Levi's truck was in the driveway. I parked beside it, calmly walked up the front steps, and let myself in. From upstairs, I heard the shower running. I didn't call out. I headed to his office and pulled open his briefcase. It wasn't even locked. Inside, neat folders labeled rental agreements, financial planning, and medical directives. I took out my phone, turned the sound off, and began photographing every document. Page after page. There were account summaries I'd never seen, checks made out to shell companies with strange names, Silver Thistle Holdings, Clovefield Management. Then I found it, Power of attorney. My signature was there. I didn't remember signing it, but I knew the ink was real. I returned everything exactly as I'd found it, closed the case, fluffed the small throw pillow on the armchair beside it, like I had merely tidied something. Then I went into the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and leaned against the sink. A few minutes later, Levi came down the stairs with damp hair and a towel slung over his shoulder. "Hey," he said, kissing my cheek. "Didn't hear you come in." I smiled faintly, the glass cold in my hand. "Just got back." "You feeling better?" "Getting there." He nodded and walked past me to grab his keys. "I've got a supply run for the site. Be back in a bit." "Drive safe," I said, still facing the window. He left, the door clicked shut. And I exhaled. That night I took a leather-bound journal from the bottom drawer of my nightstand. It was a gift from a former student. Never used. I opened to the first page and wrote in ink that didn't shake this time. "Every person who betrayed me is about to find out I remember everything." I slipped the journal back into its drawer and locked it with a tiny silver key that hadn't been touched in years. There was no need to reread the page. The words were etched inside me now. Thursday afternoon was cool and dry. I parked downtown in a metered spot outside a dry cleaner's, the kind of place where no one would look twice at a woman in a dark suit. But I wasn't there for laundry. Daniel had chosen the place, off-grid, discreet. He greeted me in a gray hoodie and jeans, more friend than lawyer. His hand was firm but brief as he passed over the envelope. "They'll deny everything," he said, "but it's all here. Dated documents, bank transfers, power of attorney misuse. The rest is yours to use how you see fit." I didn't need instructions. I just nodded, slid the envelope into my black tote, and thanked him quietly. My next stop wasn't about lawyers or signatures. It was about appearances. That evening, I drove to the gala alone. The venue was a repurposed bank in downtown Denver, all marble floors and high ceilings echoing with clinks of champagne flutes. The Monroe family had been named this year's Legacy Circle honorees by the city's Historic Society for their generational contribution to Colorado's community values. I hadn't RSVP'd, but I knew Callista would assume I wouldn't dare show my face. She was wrong. I wore a black pantsuit, no heels, no pearls, no lipstick, just a plain matte finish and flat shoes that didn't click when I walked. I blended in with the caterers until I didn't want to. I spotted Levi first. He stood near the punch fountain, laughing like nothing in our lives had ever cracked. Callista stood beside him, radiant in silver sequins, her arm looped casually through his. As the MC took the stage to introduce the Monroes, I slid into an empty seat near the back of the room. From where I sat, I could see my mother, clapping politely, my father puffed up with pride. Callista took the mic. "Good evening," she smiled. "On behalf of our family, we thank you for this honor. Legacy isn't just what you inherit, it's what you protect." She motioned to Levi, and to my brother's partner, Rowena, who helped so much over the years. Even though she's moved on, we're grateful for her grace. The room chuckled lightly. Someone clapped. I sat still, smiling like a mirror, reflective, hard, uncrackable. Then came a tap on my shoulder. "Rowena?" a voice whispered. I turned. An older man stood there, early 60s, face vaguely familiar. "I'm Jim McConnell," he said. "I worked with Levi on the Riverbend development. I hope the transfer went smoothly." "What transfer?" "The investment for the startup. I assumed you were still backing it. They said you'd reviewed the paperwork and signed months ago." My blood froze in place. "I haven't signed anything." His eyes widened slightly. "Oh, Well, apologies. I must have misunderstood. They said you were traveling when the funds cleared." I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. "Thank you for letting me know." He nodded and stepped back. I walked to the open bar, needing the glass more for the image than the wine. Behind me, I heard Callista's voice rise just above the chatter. She was speaking to a sponsor in a coral blouse, gesturing elegantly. "Rowena approved it ages ago," Callista said casually. "She just didn't want her name on anything public. That's how she's always been, quiet support." It was almost perfect. Almost. I pulled out my phone and pressed record just as Callista laughed. Her words hung in the air like perfume laced with poison. I didn't flinch. As the MC returned to the stage, thanking Callista for her speech, applause broke out again. The spotlight was about to shift. And so was the narrative. I walked slowly toward the stage, each step deliberate. When I reached the mic, I caught Callista's eye. She smiled. I didn't. I took the microphone from the MC gently, nodding with practiced calm. "If you'll indulge me," I said, turning to the crowd, "I have something to clarify. About legacies. If you'll indulge me, I have something to clarify. About legacies." My voice didn't echo. It sliced, clean. I didn't need a raised volume. Every head had turned, every glass lowered. I saw my father shift in his seat, brows knitting. My mother looked frozen in place, half smiling, unsure if this was a joke. Callista remained motionless at the edge of the stage, still clinging to the mic she had used to sing her own praises minutes earlier. Levi, ever the showman, stood half a step behind her, polished, composed, just waiting for me to embarrass myself. But I didn't come to scream. I came to end it, on my terms. I reached into the inside pocket of my blazer and pulled out my phone. "I'd like to begin with a voice you might recognize," I said gently, then tapped play. The speakers weren't built for courtroom clarity, but the words rang loud anyway. "Just forge her signature. She won't notice. Rowena never checks these things." There was no mistaking the voice. Callista's casual venom floated above the room like smoke from a fire someone had thought they buried. There was a gasp near the front, a whispered, "Oh my God," from the back. Then the silence came, not from confusion, but from certainty. I let the silence stretch. I let it settle. Then, without a trace of triumph, I opened the thin, dark leather folder I'd carried up with me. Earlier this month, I revoked the power of attorney Levi requested last year, the one I signed without reading, trusting it was just for taxes. That revocation is signed, notarized, and filed with the County Clerk of Boulder. I held up the first page. A few flashes went off. "And here," I continued, "are my signed redemptions of all stake I held in the Monroe Legacy Initiative and the venture you pitched tonight. My name, my credentials, were used without my knowledge. I've since withdrawn every ounce of legal and financial attachment to the brand." I paused. "So, whatever you've built, you get to keep it. Congratulations." The air crackled. I wasn't yelling, but every sentence hit like a bell toll in a cathedral. Levi took one step forward, raising his hand like he was approaching a panicked animal. "Ro, maybe we should step off stage. We can talk." I didn't even glance at him. "You used my name, my trust, my silence. You used my reputation to build yourselves a prettier lie. And tonight, well, I'm just giving it back to you." Callista opened her mouth, closed it. Her knuckles clutched the mic, white and stiff. She didn't look like a woman in control anymore. I wasn't done. "One more thing," I said softly, pulling out a small envelope and walking across the stage. I stopped in front of Callista and Levi. "This is a check. For the wedding gift I never wanted. You can use it to buy a truth of your own. Maybe start with a mirror." I set it gently on the podium. No flourish, no theatrics. Then I turned to the audience. "You can all enjoy the rest of the evening," I said. "But I'll be leaving now. There's nothing left here with my name on it." I walked down the steps, not rushed, not defiant. Just calm. No one stopped me. No one called after me. Behind me, the applause didn't come. Not a single clap, only silence. I walked out not as their daughter, not his wife, not her shadow, but as myself. Finally. 7 days later, I woke to the sound of waves tapping against rock, the sharp caw of gulls circling a fog-smeared sky. The salt air slipped in through the cracked window of my new one-bedroom rental in Monterey. I didn't recognize the scent at first. It wasn't lavender candles or detergent or the smell of someone else's cologne on my sheets. It was air that belonged only to me now. I sat at the edge of the bed, wrapped in a borrowed fleece blanket, and let my feet touch the cold hardwood floor. For the first time in years, I wasn't bracing for footsteps behind me or a call from someone needing a favor or an explanation. I made coffee. Slowly, silently. It steamed in my cup like a small, quiet ceremony. And I drank it alone. Not lonely, just alone. The boxes I had shipped ahead were still stacked near the window, unopened. I didn't need much. When you've lost everything that never truly belonged to you, what's left is surprisingly light. Around noon, I opened the last box marked personal. Inside, under a worn paperback and a photo album I hadn't touched in a decade, was the scarf. Ivory silk, delicate as breath. I hadn't seen it since Levi draped it around Callista's shoulders that night at our family dinner. My mother had given it to me during our engagement party. Her exact words, "So you'll always remember your place in this family." I did remember. I held it for a minute, letting the past flutter through my fingers like wind through a screen door. Then I folded it neatly, placed it at the back of the closet in the guest room, and closed the door. I didn't take it with me when I checked out the next day. Some things can't be cleaned. Only let go. That afternoon, my phone buzzed. A voicemail from Levi. "You didn't have to do that. We could have handled it privately." I deleted it. An hour later, a message from my father appeared. Short. Cold. "We didn't think you'd take it so personally." I stared at the screen for a long moment, then locked it and set it face down on the table. Let them sit with silence. Let them hear what they made of me in the void they left. I left the apartment just before sunset and walked 3 blocks to a tiny bookstore tucked between a plant nursery and a vintage diner. The doorbell jingled softly as I stepped inside. A woman behind the register glanced up. "You're the woman from the stage, right?" I blinked. My spine straightened, ready to deflect or deny. She smiled. "You said what a lot of us wish we could say." I smiled back, softer. "I guess I am," I said, "but I'm also the woman who just wants to start over." She nodded like she understood. Maybe she did. Later that night, back in the apartment, I pulled out a blank envelope and addressed it to myself. I tucked inside a single sheet of paper, nothing written on it, just space, room to breathe, to begin again. It was a quiet ritual, maybe even unnecessary, but I sealed it anyway and left it on the nightstand, a reminder. You owe no one your silence, only yourself your truth. Have you ever had to walk away from everyone just to hear your own voice again? Tell me in the comments. I read every one.